In this video, I want to tell you a little bit about the sensory capabilities of birds. So some of you may have heard this insult before, bird brain, like somebody is maybe not as intelligent as somebody else. And so this, of course, is a cartoon of what a bird brain might look like. If you've ever had a pet bird or you know somebody who has a pet bird, you might have observed some of these behaviors before. Break everything, poop on everything, demand attention, eat and sleep, and then this tiny little portion developed for being good. And of course, some of you might think this about some of your faculty, Professor Bird Brain. Maybe you think a bit about me, Professor with birds on the brain. However, birds are actually pretty smart. Birds are, for the most part, more intelligent than most mammals. The problem is that if you try to ascribe human intelligence onto animals, they're never going to measure up. And so when you look at an animal for what that animal is and you observe its sensory capabilities, then you actually can appreciate the fact that these animals are quite intelligent in their own way. So birds specifically have completely different perception than humans. Birds do not observe and interact with the world in the same way that we do. So we may think that birds are stupid because they don't respond to something the way we would, but they don't see it the way we do, so how in the world could they respond to it the way we do? They have improved color and UV perception, and that is a result of the fourth cone that they have in their eyes. They actually have excellent hearing. They can often hear very low frequencies, or very low intensity sounds that we maybe can't necessarily hear. They can sense magnetic fields, which is what allows them to migrate. And they can detect shifts in gravity and barometric pressure. They can also basically tell when the weather is changing because of the change in the barometric pressure in the atmosphere. In terms of vision, the types of birds that have the best vision are songbirds and raptors. The American kestrel, which, if you remember the American kestrel, it's a small falcon. It's about the size of a mourning dove. So picture a bird about the size of a mourning dove, but it's a bird of prey instead. It can see an insect that is 2 millimeters in size. And if you want to get out a ruler to see how tiny 2 millimeters is, go for it. It can see that small of an insect from 18 meters. That's nearly 60 feet away from where the bird itself is. Birds have very large eyes. Birds like eagles and owls, even though they are smaller than humans and their heads are smaller than a human's head, have eyes that are the exact same size. In some birds, especially, again, the eagles and the owls that are really dependent on vision, their eyes can make up 15% of the volume of their head. In humans, our eyes only make up 2%. And so even though most humans interact with the world and form their perceptions of the world based on what they see, considering that we base so much of our perception on what we see, we really devote very little of our face to being able to see. Most birds will use one eye at a time. So if you look at a bird head on, oftentimes its eyes are on the sides of its head instead of in the front like ours are. And so in order to generate that binocular vision, they bob their heads and kind of move their heads around so that they can get an accurate picture of more of what's around them. And they do have a third eyelid called the nictitating membrane. Some mammals have this too. This allows them to brush and moisten their cornea. So in this image, You can see that the nictitating membrane is currently closed, and here it's open. In birds that dive, it can basically serve as a built-in pair of goggles. So not only do birds have that fourth cone that gives them the UV sensitivity, they also have a density of cones that's 2 to 5 times higher than ours. So they can have anywhere from 400,000 to 1 million cones per millimeter of tissue in their eye. We only have 200,000. They can detect movement at over 100 hertz. We can only detect it at about 60 hertz. Basically, like when we see a hummingbird and we see it just like, right, zooms right past you, you can't see it at all. You just saw this little bullet come flying past. To birds, yes, the hummingbird is fast, but because they can sense that more rapid movement, they actually can see it as a bird. They can see the flapping of the wings better than we can. So they're basically seeing it in slow-mo, and we're seeing it sped up and fast forward. And this allows them to, again, better detect prey. So if you're an owl and you're looking for, a lizard or a snake or a small mammal in the grass, and there's just this really tight movement, we often can't. We'll see the grass move and go, what was there? What was there? What's going on? They can actually see what is there. It also can help avoid predators. It's harder to sneak up on something that can see you coming. And this ability to detect movement also can help with navigation. They have carotenoid pigments in their eyes, which help them to better see things that are against the sky. So you might remember there are times when we go out looking at birds and the bird is really backlit and we can't really discern anything except the shape, right? Or like, oh, there's a shadow of a bird. It's a bird up there, and the shape looks like a mockingbird, but I can't see any gray or white. And so what birds have are pigments in their eye that allow them to basically better make out something that's backlit. And of course, that's critically important for them because they spend so much of their time in the sky. They need to be able to see what's going on up there. As previously mentioned, they have 4 types of cones for acute color and UV vision. So this is what a starling looks like if you can see all the UV reflectance. Now, a lot of this discussion up here is more relevant to diurnal birds, birds that are out in the daytime where color vision is super important. Nocturnal birds, it doesn't really matter what shade of brown that little mouse is. They need to be able to see the mouse. So instead of cones, which assist with color perception, nocturnal birds often have more rods, which allow for better detection of light. So nocturnal birds might see things not exactly in black and white, but mostly in black and white. But they can, for them, looking around in the nighttime is kind of like looking around in the day. They can see very well because they can pick up what little light is available. In terms of hearing, we can divide the bird's ear into 3 parts: an external, a middle, and an internal ear. The external ear is going to be a little bit different from the mammalian ear. In mammals, the external ear often consists of a structure with skin and cartilage. So you can think of your own ears, a cat's ears, dog's ears. In birds, really the external ear is mostly just an opening into the skull. However, it is covered with feathers for protection. But if you grab a bird and you blow on its face just right, you can see the feathers kind of move away from the opening of the ear. In some owls, the ears are offset. And we'll talk about why that's important in just a minute, but it has to do with the ability to really accurately detect where the sound is coming from. So this is the skull of an owl called a boreal owl. And you can see that on the bird's right-hand side, so on our left, the opening to the ear is up high, kind of above the opening for the eye. And then on the bird's left, so on our right, the opening for the ear is much lower. So that's more common to see in owls. In other types of birds that aren't as dependent on their hearing, the ears will be in a more symmetrical position. One of the things that we talked about that differentiates birds from other mammals is the fact that their middle ear has only one bone. This is the diagram of the inside of a chicken's ear. So here's your tympanic membrane or your eardrum. So the columella right here is the middle ear bone, or the ear bone basically. It's the single middle ear bone. It's analogous to the stapes in mammals. And so this single ear bone is what helps to transmit the sound. Now, again, a way that birds, I don't want to say are better than people, but have a certain feature that's better than that in humans is that when they sustain damage to the hairs inside their inner ear, those hairs can regenerate. In humans, we do not have that regeneration. And so that's why repeated exposure to loud sounds, which can damage those hairs, can lead to hearing loss in humans. So in birds, maybe they'd have a temporary hearing loss, but they can quickly regrow those hairs and still be able to hear just as well as they did before. So birds won't acquire hearing loss throughout their lifetime being exposed to loud sounds. Now, one way I guess humans are better than birds is we can often hear a wider range of frequency than birds can. So we can hear more low frequency and high frequency sounds than birds. Some birds can echolocate, like a bat. They can use sound to try to find where something is. They just don't do it as well as bats. So what we're seeing on this graph here is this whole shaded area. These are sounds that humans can't hear. So here's lower and higher frequency sounds that humans can't hear, depending on the intensity, so basically the loudness of the sound. Anything that's white, we can hear. The passerines, or the songbirds, can hear everything above this kind of tightly dashed line right here. Most other birds can hear sounds that are above this solid line. But down here you have this other dashed line. And what you can hopefully notice with this other dashed line is that it really dips into sounds that are inaudible to humans. And so the order of birds that can hear down here are the strigiforms, otherwise known as our owls. So owls can hear sounds that humans can't hear. We're hearing the same frequency, but they hear them at a much lower intensity, so they can hear quieter sounds than humans can. Birds can also sense some of these features here: pressure, pain, temperature, and they do have a sense of equilibrium or balance. They have mechanoreceptors, or cells that allow them to sense mechanical stimulation. The most sensitive mechanical receptors are these cells called Herpes corpuscles. And these are found in the bills, right? That's pretty important. That's basically their mouth, right? The tactile sensation. That's an area where you have a lot of nerves too. Your lips are very sensitive. Their feather follicles, their wing joints, and in woodpeckers, the tips of their tongues. And so for a woodpecker, remember, one of the things they're doing is many woodpeckers are drilling into soft wood or perhaps drilling into the ground to look for insects. So they use their bill to drill in, and then they can stick their tongue in, and their tongue is super, super sensitive, so they can feel whether or not there's an insect in there. They have semicircular canals in their ears that help to regulate balance and spatial orientation. We have a similar feature. And so, you know, if you have an ear infection or your ears are disrupted, you can often feel dizzy and off balance. And they can sense barometric pressure, which is like the change in the weather when a storm comes, with an organ called the paratympanic organ, and that's found in their middle ear, and that's highlighted right here, PTO, paratympanic organ. Birds can taste. In the feeding video, I told you a little bit that birds don't taste as well as mammals do. Birds have between 20 and 60 taste buds total. Humans have about 10,000. So in terms of vision, I would say birds win. In terms of sound, probably mammals win, except for when you compare to owls, and nobody compares to owls. In terms of sensing the environment, I say it's probably a tie between birds and mammals in terms of sensing pressure, temperature, and pain. But because birds can sense that change in barometric pressure, I'll give them the slight edge. But with taste, of course, we blow them out of the water. We can interact in our environment with taste, and so we can we're more particular about the things that we'll eat. Birds can discern sweet, salt, sour, bitter, lipid, and sugar content, but it's just not as intense for them as it is for us. And that also does help them not be repelled by peppers. So the capsaicin in peppers makes peppers and chili unpalatable to, here it says rodents, but really to all mammals, except for those of us who like to live on the edge, right? But it does still affect us. Even if you really enjoy spicy food, it does affect you. Birds are actually attracted to some peppers. You can see this bird here in a pepper bush, which actually is probably better for seed dispersal. Now, mammals that consume peppers could contribute to seed dispersal as well, but a bird is going to get farther from the plant than a mammal will. And so it's better for the plant to be dispersed by a bird than a mammal. We are pretty tied on smell. For a long time, people thought birds did not have a sense of smell, but it has since been demonstrated that birds do in fact have a sense of smell. They do use odor detection in their daily lives. The uropygial gland has secretions that are noticeable to other birds in terms of things like pheromones and gauging the overall health of the potential mate. Nocturnal birds, as you might imagine, tend to use smell more than diurnal birds, because diurnal birds can really rely on their sight and color vision. Nocturnal birds, not quite as much. And birds like vultures, which depend on their sense of smell to identify recently deceased carrion. Kiwis, which are ground feeders looking for food in leaf litter. And petrels, which are seabirds, again, flying over the open ocean, trying to find something to eat, have the most well-developed sense of smell. So not all birds are going to have equivalent senses of smell. There are some that have better, just like in mammals. Dogs have a much better sense of smell than humans. So some birds have better senses of smell than others. And here they're giving you different types of birds and their detection threshold, like how well they detect different smells. And you can see things like doves and chickens are pretty high up here on their ability to smell things. Ground dwelling or kind of lower birds, like lower in terms of lower to the ground, can smell things pretty well. Falcons, pelicans, ducks that often rely on sight, they don't need to have such a well-developed sense of smell. And of course, one thing that birds can do that, as far as we know, humans can't, is detect the magnetic fields of the Earth. And this probably really significantly aids in their navigation. And so they can respond to magnetic fields well within the Earth's magnetic field. And they have this compound in their nose, or in their kind of their brains right here closest to their bills, that's called magnetite, or it's like a magnetite-like compound. This is the chemical formula. And so it's in their kind of in their brains and their nasal cavities, almost equivalent to, I guess, the area where your sinuses would be, where it's like, kind of behind your nose and like right there at the front of your brain. And that helps them feel the Earth's pull, so they know in which direction to travel and they know where to go during migration.